Every empire believes its money will endure. Every government promises its currency will last forever. Yet history keeps proving them wrong. From ancient Rome to medieval France, from the Confederacy to the modern states of the Middle East, people have awakened to find their savings hollow, their wages meaningless, their future stolen by systems that once looked unbreakable. Collapse is not an anomaly. It is the rhythm beneath civilization. The question has never been if economies fail, only how you survive when they do. The most dangerous belief of all is permanence. We look at our bank balances, our coins, our national notes, and imagine them carved in stone. But money is not stone. It is a promise woven from trust, and trust is lighter than air. One sharp wind of fear, and it vanishes. That is why history, though merciless, remains our best teacher. Each financial ruin leaves a map of warning signs, where value hides and where illusion dies. Those who lived to tell the tale were never the ones who believed hardest, but the ones who doubted first. Take the Byzantine Empire, the long shadow of Rome that lingered for almost 1,000 years after its western twin had fallen. At the core of its economy gleamed the gold solidus, a coin so constant that traders from the Adriatic to the Indian Ocean accepted it without hesitation. For century after century, it served as the closest thing the medieval world had to a universal reserve. Its name alone meant stability, yet confidence is a fragile alloy. You would think the Byzantines had learned from Rome's humiliation with the silver denarius, debased until it was little more than tin coated in deceit. They had not. Centuries later, imperial treasurers began to thin the gold solidus, stretching it with cheaper metals, trusting that no one would notice. For a while, no one did. But whispers travel faster than ships. When merchants started testing their coins and finding fraud in the shine, trade routes trembled. The most trusted money on earth turned into a symbol of betrayal. As the purity drained away, so did belief, and with it the empire's economic heartbeat. What endured were not imperial decrees or paper promises, but the quiet prudence of those who kept something real: gold, land, property beyond the emperor's reach. They watched value flee from counterfeit systems and flow back into things the mint could not reproduce. That was the first lesson written in dust. Governments cannot resist diluting their currency, and when they do, true wealth escapes their grasp. But not every collapse begins in a treasury. Some are born from plague. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe met its darkest visitor, the Black Death. Between the years 1347 and 1351, as much as half the continent's population vanished. Cities emptied, markets fell silent, carts rolled through narrow streets carrying the dead instead of goods. Yet even this horror reshaped wealth rather than simply destroying it. When half the labor force disappears, labor becomes treasure. Wages rose because hands were scarce. Fields went untended, rents fell, and land, once jealously guarded, could be bought for a fraction of its old worth. Families with any liquidity, a few silver coins, a barn of grain, the strength to work, suddenly held leverage unimaginable before the plague. In England and Italy, peasants negotiated like merchants, and merchants bought estates once owned by lords. It sounds distant, yet the echo reached our own century. During the pandemic of 2020, supply chains snapped, governments printed oceans of new money, and inequality widened like a fault line. Those with assets, homes, stocks, hard cash, watched their wealth inflate. Those living week to week fell further behind. Crises have always redrawn the social map. Scarcity crowns new winners. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners. After modern lockdowns, investors multiplied fortunes. Disasters do not treat everyone equally. They reward those with reserves and punish those without. If pandemics teach the speed of shock, the fall of Renaissance Florence reveals another danger: the arrogance of institutions. In the middle of the 14th century, Florence was Europe's financial capital, the proud home of the Bardi and the Peruzzi banks. Their letters of credit reached from London to Alexandria. Yet behind their marble facades lay one fatal assumption: that kings always repay. The English monarch Edward III borrowed immense sums to fight his wars against France. When his campaigns faltered, he simply stopped paying. The mighty banks of Florence, believing themselves untouchable, collapsed within months. Depositors lost everything. Trade froze. The city that had financed half of Europe suddenly begged for loans. Size had offered no protection, prestige no shield. The phrase too big to fail was already a myth 6 centuries before it became modern jargon. The ordinary Florentine learned the truth the hard way. Institutions exist to profit, not to protect. When they fall, they take your faith and your fortune with them. That same truth would replay through centuries, from the crash of Lehman Brothers in the early 2000s to frozen accounts in Beirut in the 2010s. Across the Atlantic in the middle of the 19th century, the United States faced its own monetary reckoning. The Civil War was fought with cannons and with printing presses. To fund the struggle, the Union government issued greenbacks, paper money backed only by confidence in the nation itself. At first it felt heroic, even modern, but as presses thundered day and night, each new note weakened the last. Prices climbed, trust wavered. In the South, the Confederacy went further. Desperate for resources, it printed graybacks by the cartload. By the war's end, Confederate inflation was biblical. Prices rose by thousands of percent. Soldiers' pay was worthless before they reached home. Housewives carried baskets of notes to buy a loaf of bread. By the spring of 1865, the currency that claimed to represent a nation was dead paper. Those who survived were the ones holding anything the presses could not copy: land, gold, livestock, even barrels of grain. The rest watched lifetimes of saving dissolve overnight. It is a chapter Americans seldom revisit, though they should, their own country that has already endured a total currency collapse. Protection came not from patriotic trust, but from tangible value that no decree could inflate away. Then came France. In the last decade of the 18th century, revolutionaries toppled the crown and promised a new era of equality. They confiscated church lands and backed a new paper currency, the assignat, with its supposed value. The theory sparkled with logic. Real estate as collateral, liberty as security. But power loves the printing press. Each month brought new issues, each issue eroded the last. Prices spiraled. Wages stood still. The paper notes turned to ash between people's fingers. Farmers refused to sell food for promises. Markets broke down, and the revolution began devouring its own believers. Once again, those who clung to ideals instead of realities starved. The winners were the few who held food, silver, or property, anything the government could not conjure from ink. For the rest, enlightenment came too late. Value is never what rulers declare, only what people accept. When that belief breaks, wealth doesn't shrink, it disappears. Across these centuries runs a single thread, from Constantinople's mint to Florence's counting houses, from Richmond's presses to Parisian riots. The story repeats. Each age invents its own illusion of safety, and each illusion ends the same way, in disbelief. Money in the end is only memory, and when memory fails, gold, land, labor, and skill are all that remain. 2 centuries after the assignat burned through France, the same illusion returned, this time in the East. In the final years of the 20th century, the glittering economies of Southeast Asia became the pride of the global market. From Bangkok to Jakarta, new towers rose and money poured in, most of it borrowed in foreign currencies. The system worked until it didn't. In the year 1997, a speculative strike against the Thai baht cracked the facade. Overnight, the peg to the dollar collapsed. What had been manageable debt in foreign currency became impossible to repay. Investors fled like birds before a storm. The contagion spread to Indonesia, to Malaysia, to South Korea. In a single season, currencies fell, companies vanished, and unemployment soared. Governments pleaded with the International Monetary Fund for rescue, trading sovereignty for solvency. And as always, the innocent bled first. Ordinary workers watched savings evaporate. Mortgages doubled in cost. Jobs disappeared. The hedge funds that had sparked the panic walked away richer, while nations that had trusted the global system found themselves in chains of austerity. It was not a local collapse. It was a global transfer of wealth, from debtor to creditor, from worker to financier. The moral was as old as Byzantium. Debt owed in someone else's money becomes a noose when the floor gives way. Move forward another 2 decades and the lesson reappears. Not in a kingdom or colony, but in the fragile heart of a modern state. Between the years 2019 and 2021, Lebanon's banks, once proud symbols of stability, quietly froze. Without warning, depositors awoke to find withdrawals limited, accounts sealed, the currency bleeding value. In 2 years, the Lebanese pound lost over 9/10 of its worth. Doctors, engineers, retirees, the very middle class that had trusted the system, stood outside shuttered banks, begging for access to their own life savings. They were told the money was gone. It was a new kind of theft, polite and procedural. No soldiers, no riots, no fire, just silence behind locked doors. The same pattern unfolded as always. Those who had sent part of their wealth abroad, or kept gold, property, or even cash outside the system, endured. Everyone else was trapped in paper that no longer meant anything. If this seems distant, it shouldn't. In the early 2000s, Americans watched homes repossessed while the banks that caused the disaster received bailouts. During the pandemic of 2020, governments printed trillions to keep economies breathing, a lifeline that lifted markets but left wages behind. In 2023, regional banks in the United States failed almost overnight when confidence cracked. Once again, people learned the old truth. Too big to fail is just a bedtime story for adults. So how does one survive when the structure itself begins to crumble? History offers no single cure, only patterns. In Byzantium, the survivors held gold. After the Black Death, those with silver or savings bought land abandoned by the dead. In Florence, the wise avoided the lure of overextended banks. In the American South, the real wealth was food and property, not printed paper. In revolutionary France, it was grain and silver. In modern Asia, it was freedom from foreign debt. In Lebanon, it was escaping the system before the gates closed. The forms change, but the principle does not. Survival depends on recognizing what holds intrinsic value when illusions collapse. And here lies the paradox that history keeps whispering. Collapse is both a tragedy and an opportunity. For the unprepared, it means ruin. For the prepared, it becomes the reset of a lifetime. After the Black Death, peasants became landowners because land was plentiful and people were few. After the crash of 2008, those with liquidity bought homes for half their worth while millions were evicted. The moment others panic, value changes hands. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who foresaw. Yet protection is not only about what you own, it is about what you can do. Gold can be stolen, land can be seized, but skill, the ability to produce, remains beyond inflation. In every collapse, the same figures rise. The baker who still makes bread, the craftsman who repairs, the farmer who grows, the merchant who moves goods where they're needed. These people do more than survive. They rebuild the world that follows. When money loses meaning, production still does not. People still need to eat, to build, to heal, to connect. The capacity to meet those needs becomes the truest currency. That is why every great rebuilding, from post-plague Europe to post-war Japan, began not with treasure, but with talent. The farmer's seed, the artisan's hands, the thinker's design. Those were the assets that restored civilization when paper failed. Look closely and you'll see that history's survivors always shared three traits. First, they owned something the system couldn't copy: land, metals, tools, or knowledge. Second, they stayed liquid enough to act when others froze. Third, they saw collapse not as the end, but as a beginning disguised as disaster. This trinity, real assets, real skills, and real awareness, forms the only shield that works across centuries. No government, no institution, no digital balance can substitute for it. The illusion of permanence has seduced every generation. The wise learn to see through it before it shatters. And yet, there is a deeper layer still. Every collapse exposes the same truth about human systems. They are built on stories. Money is a story of trust. Markets are stories of growth. Nations are stories of unity. When the story dies, the structure follows. What protects you is not faith in the storyteller, but the ability to live when the story changes. That is the quiet gift of studying ruin. It teaches humility, that no empire is eternal, no currency immortal. But it also teaches freedom. Once you stop believing that permanence exists, you stop fearing its loss. You learn to stand on what endures, your capacity to build, to adapt, to create value out of dust. So when the next collapse comes, and it will, remember the pattern. Every crisis is a transfer, from paper to substance, from promise to proof, from the many who believed to the few who prepared. History does not repeat, but it rhymes in every age. It punishes blind trust and rewards quiet foresight. The question then is never if everything falls apart. It always does. The real question is which side of the transfer you will stand on, the side holding promises or the side holding something real. History is not cruel, it is precise, and it will keep whispering the same lesson until someone listens.